Hi, welcome to three of our Sheltering in the Heart series. And wow, this has been a very engaging time with many different people submitting questions that I've been receiving or sharing something about their own experience in relationship to the different conversations that have been happening. So the theme for today is around surrender, acceptance, and the growing capacity to trust life. So I have many things that I want to speak about, and we're going to just see how all of that unfolds. Now, if you've been in my meditations, I've been doing meditations for years on YouTube, and in the beginning and for a long time, actually, I would give a guided meditation focused on self-realization, like really coming to see and know deeply who you are beneath all identity, before, during, and after all of experience. Like, what is the constant? What is always here? So many of my meditations have been focused on inquiry, the question of looking and reflecting deeply, who am I? And kind of going beneath all the different layers of conditioned identities, or just resting and accessing a deeper resource of calm. And this is all a foundation for being able to see more clearly what is actually happening. So I want to say there's a common phrase that I don't remember where it came from, but I've heard it many times, is that we see things as we are, not how reality is. And let's unpack that. So we see things according to how we're organized around a particular identity. So normally what happens for most people is experience happen in life, and there's a sense of something being harmed or injured, or something goes the way that we don't want it to go. And what happens is that this essence of who we are is innocent, and it's precious. It has a quality of preciousness, of gift to it, so that if there is a interpretation that something in life that has happened, there's an automatic response to want to protect, to kind of guard and protect this sense, this original birthright of innocence, of tenderness, of unbroken true nature. So that's normal for that to happen. Now, what often happens is then behaviors arise that we begin to act out of a sense of unconsciousness that forms around different identities. And these entities are often related by different dualities of this should have happened, this shouldn't have happened. I don't like this, I like that, this judgment or that judgment. And identities come like the victim identity, with the one who rescues, the savior, the one who doesn't need anything and is withdrawn, the one who is self-reliant, the critic, the one who judges. All different kinds of identities. There are many, the victim, and I even heard one today of the trauma identity. So when there's this particular any identity that is happening, it's a self-referencing point. And this kinds of energy, because initially it requires like a sense of security. There's a false sense of security in landing in a particular identity. So it kind of can collect and get solidified in the system. Now, as you know, like our job is to develop and grow, yes? And it may be that we receive all kinds of information as we do through learning through the mind. And we may understand something on a mental level. And, whatever has happened in life may make sense. But it doesn't mean that the rest of the system has grokked it, like that the heart has received that information, or the gut has received that information, or whatever part of the system has coalesced around a particular experience, so that that is still held in the system. And what happens is, as life continues, an experience might happen, and the behavior comes out of a former reactive frame of reference. For instance, something, well, let's take trauma, for instance, because everybody has had trauma. Say there was trauma around rape or abuse or some kind of medical intervention. And I'll take medical intervention for now. But there's many kinds of experiences that are real. They're actually real. So we're not discounting anything. Life can be really challenging, and there can be, and there is, a great deal of unconsciousness where people behave out of a not knowing. So say that there's medical intervention and it's frightening because perhaps there isn't a good bedside manner from the medical field. And then later in life, and usually medical people wear white jackets and perhaps masks. Everybody's wearing a mask these days. But so then there's a memory of an image of this kind of experience, where anytime somebody approaches this person who's been has had trauma in relationship to medical intervention, then anytime somebody with a white jacket approaches, then that old behavior will kick in. There'll be a fight, flight, freeze, and maybe a escape, jumping out of the system. And this is like the situation isn't actually dangerous at the time, but the body and the system doesn't know that yet. So there's many ways to work with that, but so the system hasn't received healing and the information that it needs, so that these energies that are really locked in the system can open, whether that be an outpouring of feeling or energy or need to be held and assured that everything is okay. So that part hasn't been met yet. And so there's two things happening. There's reality, which actually at the time that I'm speaking now isn't actually dangerous, but the reaction to it in the body is that it is. So this identity will continue to persist until the resolution happens, until the information is received by usually this younger place, where as an adult there may be understanding. So you could say in many ways it's a younger identity that requires information and healing so that it can grow up, so it can mature and develop and integrate within an adult system. And then the capacity to be able to actually perceive, what is really happening and what is coming from a past experience can be clarified. Now, another way that this happens often too is in early relationships where there was some form of abuse, or even it could be anything from mild to grand. There's many degrees, and all are painful to a child that they'll withdraw into a sense of protection. And that protection, that drawing in is, in a way, solidifying unconsciously an identity as a victim. And then when the adult, young person, young adult even, comes into relationship, and if there's any resemblance to this earlier time, that identity will show itself. Yeah. So when we are, so there's many ways to work with this. But one is when there's a self-referencing identity locked in the system, there's a lot of energy collected around it. One way is to, give it space. And this is where I want to speak a little bit about acceptance. I really feel that acceptance is often overrated, because acceptance can sometimes just be another layer added over top of what is already confused, which is already hurting, which is already in need of resolution, which already may have something to express, something that really needs to be met, so that the layers of that early misidentification or wounding can open. So I'd say acceptance actually comes quite naturally when we're perceiving reality as it is, when we're in a current life situation and we're able to perceive it not from a past experience that might be triggered in the moment, but as it actually is, without a carryover from something in the past. So when we inquire, like there's many forms of inquiry we can do when we've come to a certain place in ourselves where there's a certain degree of attention and consciousness. And you could say that attention, like what we give attention to, is very much linked up to what we're interested in. So if we're interested in reality, and seeing and experiencing life as it is, then our interest will become, and our focus will become very fine-tuned on seeing things clearly. So we can inquire, like, what is actually happening now? So there's a stopping in that. What's actually true in this moment? What's happening now? Another piece of inquiry might be, especially if there's a lot of wanting something to be different, wanting to change something, there can be the question, is anything missing now? Is there actually anything missing within me? Or do I need some continuous or intermittent approval and recognition and sense of being told I'm okay from the outside? Is there actually anything missing now? So, so there's a quieting that can then begin to happen in the system. And these places where energy has collected itself, because energy will go where attention has been. So if we find ourselves repeating patterns, that's where our attention has been. And these patterns can take up so much energy that we often will see only one side of an equation. And we'll usually see the side that that we say should not have happened, whatever that is. And that gives us a false sense of feeling secure. And we'll collect evidence. We'll then even go around and speak to other people to validate the evidence that we're collecting, to really establish a very strong point of view from this self-referencing. But as soon as we begin to just slow down, all of this energy that has been gathered can start to open. And as energy opens and confusion is lifted, doubts can unpack, hurts, different feelings. And we can start to feel ourselves opening into a wider space of wholeness, of holding in a space of care. That care that is in direct alignment with the essence of who we are, that was interpreted early on to be taken away, something precious being lost or taken. And these energies open into a wider field and begin to harmonize. So for me, acceptance is really about not resisting anything that presents itself. Even the energy that may want to run away, may say, I don't want this to be happening, may say, this is unfair, may question and doubt and be very angry and perhaps even have rage. I'd say that those energies are important because they're part of this collection, it's all of the suppression, all of these energies that have been suppressed and coalesced to form a self-referencing point. So acceptance is to not resist any part of this. Now, if we like, take what you could say a confusing spiritual teaching about acceptance, it can lead to just more suppression, another layer that dampens down the system and may even strengthen this former identity. And when things are suppressed in the system long enough, they can create more imbalances in the body-mind system. So illness can present, um, mental illness, physical illness, imbalances from something small to something that at a certain point can feel quite serious. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes illness is directly related to biological, chemical situation. So, don't frame that in a that I'm meaning everything. But usually, when there's emotional suppression, this is what I'm speaking about. This coalescing of sense of something being stuck in the system. So I'd say we don't need to accept anything except what's actually happening now by offering it no resistance, not butting up to it with all of our learnings, with what information we've collected about what spirituality or anything else might look like, but rather to invite the full experience of humanness, which sometimes can look and feel very messy along the way of maturing, developing, and growing up. Because self recognition, like realization, is, you could say, a shift in identity, but it isn't to a new identity. It's a shifting away from all former identities to a recognition of what's always here, what's always been with you from the beginning, will always be here with you. It's here during waking, dreaming, and sleep, but you can't necessarily describe it. It's the foundation of existence. And it has a great intelligence. So let me speak about unconscious behavior and surrender. And I want to do this by framing it around the 12-step program. I have some experience with this, and I actually work with many people who are currently even participating in 12-step programs. I remember at one time I did 365 meetings in 365 days, so in a year. And I learned a great deal about this program, and I love it. I think it's an excellent spiritual practice. And it's really about honesty. But I came to understand throughout my time in practicing it. I haven't been to a meeting in a while, but there was a great deal of alcoholism and unconscious behavior in my early family growing up. So not only did some of those behaviors become part of my default system for a while, but they were very strong in the people around me. So I wanted to understand this. And I wanted to understand all of the different ways in which unconsciousness behaves. Now, surrender is spoken about quite a bit in the 12-step program, and it is in all spirituality. Now, and also, like I want to say in all spirituality, like around different teachers and gurus and cults and things like that. Now, often what happens early on for some people, before there's a strong degree of consciousness, I mean awareness, a sense of coming into some clarity about who you are. Identities are falling away. Now, before that point, there can be a great deal of unconsciousness. So the idea of surrender can be an unconscious one in the sense of surrendering to a um, religious establishment, religious culture, um, a particular doctrine of rules and things like that, or some intermedium, or some external outside of ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, but I want to say that it is unconscious, because if there were consciousness about who you are and what you are truly, self recognition, then surrender is natural. What is there to surrender to? Not to a something, not then it's no longer subject and object, you as an object surrendering to some other object. But as you mature into consciousness, surrender is you're the subject. So surrender is an evolving of a trusting in the intelligence of life as not being separate from who you are. So there's a harmonization and there's a great access to the intelligence of life to inform your movements. I mean, even to say inform, like this is an evolving, but it's like there's a sense of life living you. And there's a sense of great trust in the intelligence of how life is moving, what is holding. Now, so surrendering from a place of unconsciousness is necessary as well, because it leads to what I just spoke about. It leads to a great trust and an infinite intelligence, not separate from who we are. Just let that land. So in the 12 steps, the first step is to be able to admit that I am powerless, right? To admit, so there's like a hunch or a hint, a hunch that there is something greater happening. Yeah. And that I admit that I am powerless. That powerlessness is over these unconscious behaviors that have coalesced around an identity, a self-referencing point that felt the need to protect itself, to guard its preciousness, its aliveness, its innocence. And then these different identities unconsciously developed out of this. So that first step is I admitted that I was powerless over my identities, my unconscious behaviors, the life that I've been living. I have no control over it. And that may be living itself out in all kinds of ways of suffering, basically. Can be with relationship, can be with alcohol, can be with drugs, can be with food, can be even with spirituality, can be with work, so it's like a hooking in happens into a pattern that is all formed around something within us that hasn't been resolved. Yeah. So that's why, I said in the beginning, we see things how we are, not how they actually are. So we see things how we are organized around these self-referencing points that have happened throughout our life, through our development, often unconscious, until they become conscious. So there's no blame in this, there's no shame, there's no judgment. Those are plays of the mind. Those can also be identities. The one that always critiques, the one that judges, the one that blames, the one that shames, the one that says this shouldn't be happening. So all of that is happening in the mind, and it isn't helping, it isn't contributing to resolving these these senses of being fractured, of being broken or disconnected from something greater. So that is a huge step, to admit that and to open to the possibility of more, to a great possibility of there being an option. And up until that point, there may have not been an option. There isn't choice. Like when unconsciousness is happening, there isn't choice. But as we are stopped, however many times it takes for us to be thrown under the bus, or to throw ourselves under the bus, or whatever might happen to, shake us and get us to wake up. I've certainly had my fair share of that over the years. And, then something that is earnest in us, that yearns to be free, can gather energy to imagine and make the choice for a different possibility. Prior to then, there may not even be the imagining that something different can happen, these possibilities. And there's layers too, okay, so we become conscious, we're become aware. Wow, okay, I see, wow, that's an old pattern, has come up again, it's acting itself out. So in practice, as we continue to meditate, there's two different ways. Well, there's many different ways to shift out of pattern, or feeling stuck in a pattern. So one is you could say is more quiet, and it involves both things that I'm going to talk about involve a stopping. So that's a stopping, and it's like a resting back, either in meditation, in ways that all of us have learned to have some space to be the presence of noticing and watching how these patterns are spinning out. So there's a little bit of space, and in that spaciousness, then a new choice, a new possibility can present itself. So there's that slowing down of reflecting, of looking inside, of questioning, is there anything missing, really? And really getting more of a handle on reality. And then for some people that isn't effective initially, but it is necessary, because it helps us to establish a foundation, a resource in calm, a resource in something that is true, that we can root in, something that's constant, something that's very open and alive, something that's always here. It's our medicine, it's our greatest resource. Another way to get out of stuckness, though, is activity, movement, like Maybe we need to go out and have a good run, do a good yoga class, do some writing, some journaling, maybe cooking, just creating something, gardening, getting your feet and hands in the earth, swimming, whatever it is, but moving the energy so that the weight of it can start to break open, and it can shift us from a action of feeding the unconscious pattern and giving it more solidity to beginning to really break it open and let another layer of it lift. And then later again, it might show itself again. And then to let another layer of that lift and peel off. So old identities are fractured parts of the self, are being given an opportunity to either fall off because they're not necessary, they're not serving, they're not contributing, or they, harmonize. The energies can be transmuted and harmonized as life force, to fortify our system. So, let me see what else I want to speak about here. I made some notes because I got really excited about different emails that I received. Yeah, let me go further with this, because I know many of you that listen to me and come on to these meditations, this isn't new to you and the language is familiar. And, so I try to be simple with my languaging, because I try to not use the same language and not get too conceptual, because all of this is meant for direct experience. And each time that, energy a pattern is able to open and be noticed and witnessed in presence, it loses, a sense of Velcro, of sticking, and then collecting evidence and, substantiating itself. It can all that, the energy of that can fall off and open and be seen as not necessary. And the more that we, not just realize who we are, but also mature, grow up, grow in to who we are, so it's a movement of growing into who we are and expressing out who we are. Because we're not, we begin to experience directly that we're not separate from the intelligence of life. So say something like right now, I know one person who contacted me is in a major transition in their life. And any time that we're in transition, any lingering bits, are gonna, want to have a voice. And let them have a voice. It's good, like to space for all the different voices that present, for them to be listened to, so they can sort out, and then our perception is clarified in that sorting out. Yeah. And as we continue with our practice, we can begin to feel the intelligence in the transition. Like, yes, throughout that transition, I speak, if you've been on retreats with me, I speak about often the need for a transition blanket, like, a way of being held as we transition from one context of life to another context of life, and allowing what is no longer necessary to fall off, through that transition. Because then we're able to contribute, we're able to bring forth what is necessary to contribute to the forthcoming, let's say, context. Yeah. So this is inviting along the way any content that hasn't been resolved in the system to have a resolution. Otherwise, we may be leaving one particular context and thinking that the next context is going to be different. But if we haven't let go of what is no longer needed and bring with us only the needful, then we are enlivened to contribute to a different kind of context that might be different. So here, this is how we don't, not that whatever we were in wasn't right, or good or okay. I'm sure in all situations there's gifts in it, there's learnings, there's opportunities to heal and develop and be informed. But here in this transition, we can open, like in this, what is needed, what's no longer needed. Then we become more spacious in a larger intelligence. So it's not up to us. It's not up to us as an individual because we're not that. But we can then gather energy and be informed by the intelligence of life. This wider view that maybe not every part of who we are has received the information of that yet. To really trust it. To trust it. This greater intelligence and how it is unfolding. It doesn't mean that we become passive in any way. This is an active engagement of, what is needed, what is no longer needed, what is still resolving itself. What is my interest? To be clear on that, because our attention will go toward what our interest is. We hear this a lot as a foundational kind of defining of intention, interest. Because focus will follow what we're interested in. And nobody can tell you that. So I wanna read something. I had a very good time last night with Nisargadatta Maharaj. I actually have this classic, I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. And there's talks with him, and I just love how they're kind of crisp. They feel like a whole nothing back dialogue that happens. It's very it's not polite often. And I like that. But this is a little section called Live Facts, Not Fancies. And the questioner says, you say that whatever you see is yourself. So he is saying right now what I said earlier in a different way, but he's saying the very same thing. You say that whatever you see is yourself. Yeah. So we are perceiving who we identify ourselves to be and how we are organized around that self-referencing. It's not a bad thing, but it just means that reality hasn't clarified itself. And for some of us that, as I was talking about the situation of trauma in a medical situation or in a relationship that, with a parent or whatever, and then having something that resembles that occur and have the same reaction as if the other experience was happening. Yeah, so the reality is that you're actually safe, but something in you doesn't quite know that yet. And we can do things about that. We can desensitize, we can do inquiry, we can, resolve whatever that is and take whatever time it needs to receive the information that right now in this current day, you are okay, you are safe, that you don't need to protect. Protection at the earlier time was needed and maybe it didn't happen. So there's a missed experience, and that might be part of the healing too, to have the support of protection, to have some intervention that, especially when there's, early family trauma, to have somebody intervene and play a particular role in that early scene, that stops that abuse from happening. I often play that role in a thing I call Olympias. Not Olympics, but Olympia. People call them Olympics, although at the time it might feel like that. But no, it's much simpler. Yeah, it's just addressing a missed experience, which is really important. So he says this, and then, this whole dialogue continues. And it's very, very great, but I can't read it all to you now. And okay. So talking then about the needful and the not, what's not necessary. And so Maharaj says, the needful is good, and the needless, he's using the word evil, and I'm just going to say, is not necessary, right? Because, his use of the word evil, you would need to read more into this to get what he's talking about. He's basically talking about the duality of good and bad, right and wrong. So the questioner says, what is necessary? And Maharaj says, to grow is necessary. To outgrow is necessary. To leave behind the good for the sake of the better is necessary. And the questioner says, to what end? Maharaj says, the end is in the beginning. You end where you start, in the absolute. In the absolute, that which you are in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And the questioner says, why all this trouble then to come back to where I started? Maharaj says, whose trouble? Which trouble? Did you pity the seed that is to grow and multiply till it becomes a mighty forest? Do you kill an infant to save him or her from the bother of living? Remove the obstacles to growing, and all your personal, social, economic, and political problems will just dissolve. The universe is perfect as a whole, and the parts striving for perfection is a way of joy. Willingly sacrifice the not needed for that which is needed. I switched the words a little, but I wanted to relate it to my talk. And there will be no more talk about good and evil. And then the questioner says, Yet we are afraid of the better and cling to the worse. This is a really good observation because this is what I was speaking about in the beginning, how an incident, a situation, an experience can happen. And, whatever the interpretation of that is usually negative, it shouldn't have. Then you even see this in the news, how much energy forms around negativity. And then this becomes like a place of stuckness, you know? So he says, so we cling to the worst. So just watch that in yourself and not to be concerned about those around you, but how do we do that? That's the inquiry. And Maharaj's response is, this is our stupidity verging on insanity. Yes. Somewhere in here, I don't remember where, but he says, and I love this. It's kind of like you take care of your own house, do your own housekeeping and notice that everything else takes care of itself. So just imagine, if we all were fortified and interested enough to resolve our own inner conflict, to clean up our laundry, to take care of our house. Yeah. And not meddle in other people's business. And in doing so, like here, the heart that we are, all every part of who we are, the heart of who you are is informed, and you can feel the goodness of you just expanding in all directions that naturally trusts the intelligence of life, that what's happening is happening, and it doesn't need a interpretation, certainly doesn't need a conclusion. There are no conclusions. What we are is infinitely here. Each moment may be unique, but what's beneath, what's always here. So I'm going to go over onto the Zoom call now. I don't even know how long I've been chatting, but I didn't think I would chat that long. But thank you for your likes, comments, shares, for tuning in. If you want the link to the Zoom, you need to register for it at my website. And I got a new website coming hopefully very soon. It's going to launch, and you can register for the Zoom conversation. So your contributions, your subscriptions are very welcome, and I appreciate it so much. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. And thank you for your questions and sharing some really deep shares. And I love the Zoom conversation because we have an opportunity to flesh things out even more. So see you over there. Namaste.